The Ashkenazi origins stand as one of Europe's deepest mysteries. They claim descent from ancient Israelites and rose to prominence in Central and Eastern Europe during the late Middle Ages. But here's what nobody can fully explain. How did they actually get there? When did this migration happen? And, most controversial of all, are they truly descendants of the ancient populations of the Levant? This topic carries extreme sensitivity, and the truth must be handled with respect and precision. Conspiracies have twisted this history for too long, but genetic evidence and historical facts will finally separate truth from myth. The real origins of the Ashkenazi are about to emerge from centuries of confusion. The name itself holds the first clue. Ashkenazi derives from the biblical figure Ashkenaz, a son of Gomer. In Jewish tradition, all humanity descends from Noah, which forced Jewish scholars and later Christians to explain every people on earth through Noah's sons. As knowledge of the world expanded, so did these explanations. Ancient Jewish historian Josephus claimed Gomer originated the Celts through the Cimmerians, then the Gauls and Galatians. A major Welsh publisher is still called Gomer Press because of this connection. Originally, Ashkenaz seemed connected to the Assyrians, but by the 10th century AD, it was applied to the kingdom of Ararat in Armenian history. John Catholicos wrote that their people were originally called Ashkenaz and descended from him. This came from earlier use referring to the South Caucasus region, while Gomer was associated with the Cimmerians north of the Caucasus Mountains. But where does this lead us? To divide different European regions into different descendants of Japheth, Jewish people living in Iberia became known as Sephardics, those in France as Zaphatics. But here's the critical evidence nobody disputes. The Ashkenazi must have primarily dwelled in South and Central Germany because their language, Yiddish, developed from Old High German. By the 10th century, the towns of Mainz, Worms, and Speyer formed the core of Ashkenazi culture. While we know quite a lot about Ashkenazi history, beginning in the 10th century, there are many hundreds of years where written history tells us almost nothing. This gap led to incorrect but originally well-meaning theories that have lingered far past their expiration date. The most pernicious and widespread is the Khazar theory. The Khazars were a Turkic group from Central Asia who pushed west into what is now European Russia in the 6th century AD. They established their power center north of the Caucasus, approximately where the Cimmerians had previously lived, and from there they spread along the Don, Volga, and Dnieper rivers. Due to some symbols they used and vague historical commentary, some believe at least the Khazar leadership converted to Judaism, which would be quite unusual if true. The Khazars would eventually face the forces of the Rus and be completely defeated by the Slavs around the 10th century. An early modern Jewish scholar proposed that the Khazars were the origins of the Ashkenazi because of their former territory and supposed Jewish religion. By the end of the medieval period, many Ashkenazi were living in what is now Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine, and the Khazars seemed to provide an easy answer for how they got there. But you won't believe what the evidence actually reveals. This easy answer was the wrong answer and has since been weaponized to maliciously claim that Ashkenazi Jewish people have no actual connection to the historical Israelites. First, the Yiddish language itself disproves the Khazar theory. The Khazar language was a form of Turkish, and how an Eastern European Turkic tribe would end up speaking a language derived from Old High German goes completely unanswered by this theory. The known medieval history of Ashkenazi development in Germany likewise disproves it. However, it can now be disproved conclusively through genetics. Look at a genetic sample of a modern Ashkenazi Jewish person from Poland and its closest genetic matches with other modern Eurasian samples. Despite dwelling in Poland for hundreds of years, and despite having no recorded historical contact, Polish Ashkenazi are more closely related to all other Ashkenazi and to Jewish populations throughout Europe and the Mediterranean than they are to Poles. You can notice proximity to certain Anatolian groups, but this is explained not by Turkish origins, but because these Anatolian Turks are predominantly descendants of a pre-Turkish population, especially those dwelling along the Mediterranean. This is why you can also see that the Ashkenazi group fairly closely with people from southern Italy and Greece. There is simply no reality to the Khazar theory. When we examine male haplogroups, the J lines representing the plurality of male Ashkenazi lineages are unquestionably of Levantine origins. The most significant line other than J is E1b. At first glance, this could look Greek or South Italian in origin, but on closer inspection, a significant amount of these haplogroups are not EV13, but EM123, which is specifically of Levantine origin. A minority can be attributed to ancient Greek or Italian male admixture. This is also the case for some of the around 8% of R1a, which belongs to R1a M582, a branch that developed in the Middle East, likely originally spread by an ancient Indo-Iranian population. Around 10% of Ashkenazi carry haplogroup R1b, which does mostly appear to represent male European ancestry, likely Germanic. What happens when we look at the female side changes everything. A surprising amount of Ashkenazi male lineage originates from the region of ancient Israel. Given that they lived as a small minority group for so long in Europe while maintaining their lineages, this is an impressive feat of history. However, in contrast to this remarkable male continuity, there is notable, overall autosomal admixture from outside the Levant. This admixture is predominantly female-driven, meaning that Jewish men were taking non-Jewish wives who would then be integrated into the community. This is entirely normal with migrating populations and also occurs in many other cases during the spread of Indo-Europeans, for instance. Some estimates suggest that upwards of 80% of female Ashkenazi mitochondrial DNA is of European origins. Mitochondrial haplogroups, which are prominent among Ashkenazi women, are almost certainly from southern Europe, likely Italy and Greece specifically. Much of this admixture seems to have happened very early on, before the major population movement separated different Jewish groups into different parts of Europe. The Ashkenazi are indeed descended from the ancient Israelites who carried their traditions, beliefs, and identity into Europe long before many would assume, before even many modern European ethnic groups existed. When the ancestors of the Hungarians were still in Asia, when southern Germany and Austria was still Celtic, when Illyrians and Celts battled for control of the Balkans in the times before Caesar conquered Gaul, the ancestors of the Ashkenazi were already living in southern Europe. Though DNA does not tell us the exact dates of this, history provides us with a fairly clear guide. The earliest surviving historical account of Jewish people in Europe is made by Marcus Tullius Cicero in 56 BC. What he says is shocking, but be advised that he advances certain negative stereotypes. His words reveal something nobody expected about the Jewish community's influence in ancient Rome, and what he describes will completely reframe everything you thought you knew about when Jews arrived in Europe. Cicero speaks of the odium attached to Jewish gold, and explains the reason this case is being tried near the Aurelian Steps. He says the prosecutor procured this place and that crowd for the trial, then adds something remarkable. He knows what a big crowd it is, how they stick together, how influential they are in informal assemblies. So he will speak in a low voice so only the jurors may hear him, because there are those who would incite them against him and every respectable man. He explains that every year it was customary to send gold to Jerusalem on the order of Jews from Italy and from all Roman provinces. Flaccus forbade by edict its exportation from Asia. Cicero asks who could not honestly praise this action, noting the Senate often earlier and, in his consulship, most urgently forbade the export of gold. But to resist this barbaric superstition was an act of firmness. To defy the crowd of Jews when sometimes in their assemblies they were hot with passion for the welfare of the state was an act of the greatest seriousness. This commentary tells us many critical things. By 56 BC, the Jewish community in Italy and Rome specifically was large enough that it was having a notable impact on the politics and economy of the empire. The issue at hand was that Flaccus, the governor of Asia, was being accused of misappropriating gold that the Jewish community was trying to send to the temple in Jerusalem. Cicero defends the decision, basically saying Flaccus was trying to prevent what would now be called capital flight, Gold was sent back to Jerusalem to help support the temple, and apparently the amounts were large enough that it actually concerned the political elite. Cicero mentions the Aurelian Steppes because they were said to be a gathering place for the Jewish community in Rome, not far from the temple of Castor and Pollux. But he's also aware that the name Aurelian means golden. He accuses Laelius, the tribune of the plebs acting as lead prosecutor, of intentionally influencing the trial through Jewish community mobilization. The crowds are insinuated by Cicero to be primarily Jewish. However, his dislike for the Jewish community is equaled by his dislike for Greeks. He grants them literature and knowledge of many arts, does not deny the charm of their speech, the keenness of their intellects, the richness of their diction. But truth and honor in giving testimony, that nation has never cherished. He references the saying, "Testify for me, and I'll testify for you," noting it's so entirely Greek that even those who don't understand Greek know the Greek words for this expression. Cicero tried to argue Greeks and Jews were conspiring together to undermine proper Roman rule. But here's what matters most. By 56 BC, the Jewish community was already a significant player in Rome's politics and had become a factor in political and economic discussions. Unfortunately, no surviving ancient account fully explains the origins of this settlement, but the core community must have existed prior to Roman conquest of Israel. This can be shown by later references from Valerius Maximus writing around 30 AD, who claimed that Cornelius Hispalis in 139 BC expelled Jews from Rome, saying Hispalis also expelled from the city Jews who had tried to transmit their sacred rites to Romans. Other Roman accounts likewise claimed that during particular periods, some Jewish communities engaged in proselytizing, which, to the Romans, was a violation of custom, holding that each people should maintain their own ancestral traditions. Cassius Dio, writing in the 3rd century AD, says, "As Jews flocked to Rome in great numbers and were converting many of the natives to their ways, Germanicus Tiberius banished most of them." Later, Christians who developed out of the Jewish community would be the most well-known and successful proselytizers. The initial major flow of Jewish peoples into Italy can perhaps be traced to the conquest of Greece. Alexander the Great conquered the region of Israel around 332 BC, bringing ancient Israelites under Greek political authority. In Greece, presence of a Jewish community is archaeologically attested as early as the 3rd century BC, recording the manumission of a Jewish slave. From the 2nd century onward, there is archaeological evidence for a notable Jewish community in Delos. Delos was a major trading hub used by Phoenicians, and Jews were playing an important role in Delos trade. Romans transformed it into a free port in 167, and significant amounts of Eastern Mediterranean trade would transit through Delos. During this period, there is evidence for a major Jewish community, including a building some scholars believe was a synagogue. Under the Ptolemaic kingdom, the Jewish community in Egypt would dramatically expand. This is why many notable early Jewish scholars came from Egypt, such as Flavius, Josephus, and Philo. Josephus detailed this long, close relationship between the Jewish community and Greek elite, which saw Jews increasingly becoming native Greek speakers, translating their works into Greek and becoming adepts in Greek philosophy. This is why the Tanakh, or Old Testament, was translated into Greek. When Romans took control of the Greek world, it provided an obvious opportunity for some entrepreneurial people in the community to expand into other regions of the Roman Empire, which then spanned the entire Mediterranean. We can only rely on words of later writers, such as Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish Neoplatonist. He wrote about an anti-Jewish pogrom that took place in Alexandria around 1 AD. What he says next reveals just how widespread the Jewish diaspora had already become, and his words contain a warning that would echo through the centuries. Philo said it was sufficiently evident that the report about destruction of synagogues, which took its rise in Alexandria, would immediately spread over all districts of Egypt and extend from that country to the east and oriental nations, and from borders of land in other directions, from the Mareotic district, which is Libya's frontier, towards the setting sun in western nations. He explains why no one country can contain the whole Jewish nation by reason of its populousness. on which account they frequent all the most prosperous and fertile countries of Europe and Asia, whether island or continent. They look upon the holy city as their metropolis, where the sacred temple of the Most High God is erected, but account those regions which have been occupied by their fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers, and still more remote ancestors, in which they have been born and brought up, as their country. There are even some regions to which they came the very moment they were originally settled, sending a colony of their people to do pleasure to the founders. Philo feared that all populace in every country, taking what was done in Egypt as a model and excuse, might insult Jews who were their fellow citizens by introducing new regulations with respect to their synagogues and national customs. Thus, already by 1 AD, Jews had spread all across Asia and Europe, and he feared their communities might end up targets of further attacks. Some of these communities had been established by distant ancestors, meaning they were already very ancient by the time Philo wrote. According to Philo, the Jewish community in Rome at that time primarily dwelt on the far side of the Tiber, around the area of Vatican Hill. He explained how Augustus looked upon this great division of Rome beyond the river Tiber, which he was well aware was occupied and inhabited by Jews, and they were mostly Roman citizens. Having been brought as captives to Italy, they were manumitted by those who had bought them as slaves without ever being compelled to alter any of their hereditary or national observances. Augustus knew they had synagogues and were in the habit of visiting them, most especially on sacred Sabbath days when they publicly cultivated their national philosophy. He knew also they were in the habit of contributing sacred sums of money from their first fruits and sending them to Jerusalem by the hands of those who were to conduct the sacrifices. However, the Roman elite was suspicious and not quick to like any outside group. Historian Tacitus scathingly reports what were likely widespread feelings among many Roman elite. Be warned that he deploys very negative stereotypes here. What he writes reveals the deep tension building between the Jewish community and Roman society, and his words contain a chilling prophecy about what was to come. Tacitus says the worst rascals among other peoples, renouncing their ancestral religions, always keep sending tribute and contributions to Jerusalem, thereby increasing the wealth of Jews. Again, Jews are extremely loyal towards one another and always ready to show compassion. But towards every other people, they feel only hatred and enmity. They sit apart at meals and sleep apart. They adopted circumcision to distinguish themselves from other peoples. By this, difference. Those converted to their ways follow the same practice, and the earliest lesson they receive is to despise the gods, to disown their country, and to regard their parents, children, and brothers as of little account. Because the Jewish community set itself apart from non-Jews, this created resentment that bleeds through in Tacitus's words. But it was this exact same tendency that allowed Jewish people to not be absorbed into broader Roman society and disappear as a distinct people. Again, we see a reference made to conversions, and such conversions likely account for the majority of non-Levantine male haplogroups among the Ashkenazi. There is absolutely no question the Jewish community was solidly established across Greece and in several places in Italy by the 1st century, and it maps directly with Christianity's spread. When Paul or others in the Bible speak about Gentiles, they're not referring to non-Christians but to non-Jews. In Rome, there are a number of catacombs dated to the early empire. While the most famous are Christian catacombs, there are also exclusively Jewish ones. Some population estimates suggest that by the time of Christianity's spread, the Jewish population in Rome and Ostia was around 40 to 50,000, or at least 5% of the total population. It's no coincidence that regions in Greece and Italy also appear to match with the location of primary underlying European admixture among Ashkenazi. Many early Christians were Hellenized or Romanized Jews, those who had been losing their attachment to traditional Jewish religion and customs, many of whom no longer spoke Hebrew or Aramaic, but only Greek or Latin. In Acts, the name of the exiled Roman Jew, Aquila, gives testimony to this, as it's a traditional Roman name, not Jewish. To these people, Christianity may have provided them a way out, but it also provided them a new way to maintain attachment and continuity with their Jewish identity. Many non-Hellenized Jews, saw it as a betrayal of their people, their religion, and their traditions. It was a kind of spiritual civil war, not confined to Judea, but in every Jewish community across the empire. The Bible depicts just this in the crucifixion of Jesus, but tells the account from only one side. From the viewpoint of the traditional Jewish community, Jesus was a rebel trying to overthrow the traditional Jewish religion and leadership. Had he and those who followed him succeeded in converting all Jews, there would today be no Jewish people. Over several generations, Jews who did convert stopped being Jews and just became Christians of whatever nation they dwelt in, merging together with non-Jewish populations. At the same time, it was the Christian Jews, likely due to their efforts at conversion, who were increasingly drawing the ire of the Roman state. This was realized brutally in the Acts of Nero in 64, when Christians were blamed for the fire and subjected to the worst deaths. Just a few short years later, however, the Roman-Jewish War would break out, as Jews in the traditional lands of Israel attempted to rebel against Roman rule. The rebels were crushed, and the Second Temple looted and destroyed. Under the subsequent rule of Vespasian, a special Jewish tax was introduced, where Jews were specifically targeted with extra tax burdens just for being Jewish. These tragic events marked the end of Jewish political autonomy for nearly 2,000 years. With the center of Jewish traditions and religious worship no more, the strong religious ties to their ancestral homeland were weakened. It may have led to more Jewish people moving to Italy and other parts of the empire, but by the 2nd century AD, much of the growth of the Jewish community in Europe is thought to have been internal to Europe itself. How and why did a group of Roman and Greek Jews move into southern Germany? Strangely enough, it might have begun in a far earlier time than what's often supposed. The first Jewish person that we know to have lived in Gaul is recorded in an account by Josephus speaking of an event around 6 AD. Herod Archelaus was a client ruler of Judea on behalf of Rome. He is best known as the tyrant King Herod from the Bible. Due to his misdeeds and the reorganization of the empire, Herod was sent into exile in a place nobody would expect. He was sent to Vienne, not the famous Vienna, but a place in Gaul by the same name, seemingly named for the river it was situated along. It was the capital of the Gallic tribe of the Allobroges, about 35 kilometers south of Lyon. It had become a major urban center by the time of Herod's banishment there, and would have been seen as a perfect place to establish a trading network from north to south. Far from a backwater, it rivaled Lugdunum for its grandeur, but was far enough away from political power and trouble. When a figure like Herod, effectively a king, goes into exile, he doesn't go alone. He goes with an entire court, his retinue, his extended family, and then their family and their retinues. When he went to Vienne, he or members of his extended family would have set about establishing businesses, perhaps establishing trading, which they excelled in. This would have drawn more Jewish people north, especially in times when they were facing increasing persecution elsewhere. Even before Herod, there may have been Jewish presence in Gaul. In Gallia Narbonensis, a lamp with the symbol of the menorah has been recovered, dated to between 27 BC and 14 AD. We know Jewish people were spread out in many different locations by the 2nd and 3rd century AD, but there are slim archaeological traces. In Arles, Gaul, a Jewish sarcophagus has been found dating to the 3rd century. Beyond identified crypts in Rome and some others in Venosa and Naples, there are no clear Jewish burial sites. It is instead to the law records and church canon that we have to turn to see the earliest locations of Jewish communities. With the rise to power of Constantine in 306 and the legalization of Christianity, which quickly moved to the political domination of Christianity, new problems were emerging for Jewish people, and some early laws reflect this. There were laws against converting to Judaism. There is even a law in 339 which says women who had been working in imperial weaving factories, yes, the Romans had state factory production, but who had been taken as wives or partners by Jews must be restored to the factories, and that Christian women could not be joined with Jewish men. Already by 321, we have clear evidence of an established Jewish community in Cologne, Germany. A law was passed in Cologne explaining that Jews could be called up to the Curia, but that some few of them could be exempted. This proves not only that there was a Jewish community established along the Rhine in the 4th century, but also that it was large enough that specific laws and exemptions were being made for them. They must also have had very wealthy members, as serving in the Curia entailed potentially significant financial expenses. Though evidence is lacking, it's reasonable to assume Jewish presence existed all along the Roman Rhine frontier, possibly even going down to Mainz, Worms, and Speyer, even at this early time. Another sign of how large and powerful the Jewish community had become within the empire was that when Julian the Apostate, whom Christians called the Apostate, had gained office, he wrote a special address to the Jewish community. He apologized to them on behalf of the state for past wrongs done to them, ordered repeal of the Jewish tax, called the Jewish patriarch his brother, and promised to rebuild Jerusalem once he concluded the war with Persia. Clearly, at the very least, he was seeking support of the Jewish community, very likely to help him counter his Christian opponents, which suggests they were notable power players. Unfortunately, he was killed in battle with the Persians, and Christians were immediately able to regain political power. What happened next would shape the fate of Jewish communities across Europe for the next 1,000 years.